French President Emmanuel Macron's call for a snap parliamentary election is likely to be the biggest gamble of his political career. As support for the far right sweeps across France, is the country's diplomatic and economic future hanging in the balance? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Macron's party faced a crushing defeat in the European elections, which saw Marine Le Pen's national rally top the polls. So, what happens if Le Pen's party wins the most seats? And how could such a divided government actually function?
Bonjour à tous.
This is the moment that shocked France and many across the world when President Macron called a snap election.
On avait déjà le désordre.
We already had disorder and the extremes were there, and so I have made a decision which is a decision of confidence in the people, that is to say you, us. So there's no need to be afraid on June 30th. You have to go out and vote, you have to convince people, and you have to vote responsibly.
Il faut voter en responsabilité.
The ballot will take place over 2 rounds on June 30th and July 7th. But Macron faces a serious uphill battle. A survey conducted by the polling company Ipsos for the daily Le Parisien and Radio France found that France's far-right National Rally Party and its allies are leading with 35.5% of the vote. The left-wing New Popular Front is in second place with 29.5% of the vote, while President Macron's centrist alliance rounds out third place at 19.5%. The French left have joined forces to fight the national rally. They are making promises on both domestic and international issues.
Dès notre arrivée au pouvoir,
as soon as we come to power, we will decide on price-freezing measures on food and energy to immediately restore purchasing power to the French. We will also act immediately to re-establish a path of peace for France on the international scene by supporting Ukraine in the face of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression and by seeking means to obtain an immediate ceasefire in the face of ongoing massacres in Gaza.
Meanwhile, Marine Le Pen is working hard to broaden her voter base by focusing on high inflation and living standards. Le Pen's Euroscepticism will have repercussions for France's relationship with the EU and its closest ally, Germany.
I'm a little hesitant to comment on election results before the election has happened. This goes for domestic elections and even more so for foreign ones. I'm indeed worried about the elections in France. I would like to underline that, and I hope that parties which are not Le Pen, to put it that way, are successful in this election, but it's up to the French people to decide that.
So if the President and Parliament end up with opposing views on some of the biggest issues, what could this all mean for the future of French politics?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Saint-Malo in France is Jacques Reland. He is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute. In London, Joseph Downing. He is a senior lecturer in international relations at Aston University and the author of French Muslims in Perspective. And here with me in the studio, Nabila Ramdani. She is a journalist and the author of Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Nabila, I'll come to you first. I noticed a quote the other day from the French football superstar, Kylian Mbappe. He said, "The extremes are at the gates of power." Is he right?
Yes, I think so. It's an extremely daunting prospect for France, these forthcoming parliamentary elections, not least of all because any observer was quite baffled as to why on earth would Macron allow an extremist party, the far right, to ride on a wave of success at their score at the EU parliamentary elections. It seems to have been a gift to an extremist party to allow them to build up a power base domestically And the irony, of course, is that the National Rally and previously the National Front before it reviled the EU Parliament, and yet they build the power base at the EU Parliament, and now they're trying to transfer that kind of success into domestic politics. And this is a party that is engulfed in corruption scandals. Marine Le Pen herself and her 95-year-old father stand accused of effectively channeling funds from the EU into domestic politics to boost their popularity at home. Both will stand trial next year, and it will be extraordinary if they survive this trial, that Macron is effectively allowing them to have a massive stake in domestic politics, which could translate in having a 28-year-old Prime Minister in Jordan, Bardella, somebody who has zero experience of government, and indeed boost the National Rally's credentials in view of the 2027 presidential elections.
Jacques, I'll come to you. Why has Macron done this? I mean, he shocked everyone, he surprised everyone. The first question is, why?
It puzzles everyone. But what can be said is that I think he wanted to call the French people's bluff. They say, okay, you voted for this party at the European election, which doesn't mean anything. Why should he dissolve? That's what surprised everyone after a European election. European election are a time, especially in midterm like that, where electorates tend to vent their spleen at the government. And governments always lose European election. Last time in 2019, they came neck and neck, Macron and National Front. But this time it's very different. And I suppose he was also hoping to broaden his majority by saying, okay, to the French people, now, Lucy, the National Front could come to power. So let's become sensible. Let's think about the future of France. And he was hoping maybe to appeal to the socialist, the social democratic wing of the left, and to attract them. But at the same time, he was very disappointed because the left united. They are divided on everything, on perspective, they're divided on international politics, on Europe and so on, but they united. Their unity is purely electoral, because on the evening of the 7th, they'll probably split because they have very different views about the future of France. So I think he wanted to call their bluff. And I think the opinion polls seem to indicate that he's going to lose this thing. And in that sense, he's playing a very dangerous game. He's playing with the democratic suffrage, which could bring this very extremist National Front Party to power. So maybe now he's having second thoughts. We don't know. I know he's disappointed his supporters very much, and most of them are very angry with him. They think that they've lost their jobs. They had a relative majority, but fairly big numbers. They think that they are going to lose loads of seats, and many people think that Macron has acted really unwisely and is being seen as more toxic. Many candidates of his own supporters don't want his picture on the posters. So he should not be intervening in the campaign, and every day, and he makes some controversial statements which upset people. So people are wondering whether he's lost it a bit.
Joseph.
And he could be hoisted by their own petard.
Joseph, France stands at a crossroads now. This is a very significant moment in French political history.
Definitely, but the thing that we need to understand here is that France has been at this crossroads several times recently. I mean, we've had very similar conversations about Marine Le Pen being in the presidential runoff with Macron, and this is a ghost that haunts French politics repeatedly. I mean, this isn't necessarily something that's radically new. Yes, it's in a different form. Yes, the danger comes in a different package in terms of Jordan Bardella, who is extremely savvy in front of a camera, and really is playing the tune that people seem to really resonate with. And this is a problem that France faces repeatedly. And I do wonder if, to a certain extent, a bit like the UK with the Brexit moment, whether this is a boil that France needs to lance, right? This is a spectre that continually haunts French politics at the highest level, we see the total disintegration of the established party structures that have really governed France since the end of the Second World War. We see a socialist party in disarray. We see a centre-right party that in effect is kind of seeking an alliance with the far right. I mean, it makes you look and say, who is the popular mainstream party here? It really is quite confusing. And I do wonder whether the support for the National Front can only be eroded by them actually having some experience of power, however unpalatable that may seem. They have a massive advantage over the established parties and established candidates in that they can make all of the utopian promises that they like, because they've not been tested by power. The left is seen as being as having failed. The right is seen as having failed because they've had power. And the problem with the National Front is they've not had to actually enter into the messy business of governing. You can see already some of the key policies are being rode back on by Bardella and the National Front because they realise, governing is not a utopian pursuit. Governing is about compromise. Governing is about explaining, as Macron has done to people, look, we don't have the money for people to retire at 60. We have to put up the retirement age. And I think a bit like Meloni in Italy, if the National Front did get a taste of power in France, you would see very quickly them backpedaling on many of their key policy promises, which would, I think, significantly erode their support at the national level.
Nabila, national rallies say that if they win and they get into government, they would be reasonable, realistic and responsible. Do you believe them?
Well, first of all, I think there's a lot of caveats around the fact that they might get into government or not. I think, in my view, the most realistic outcome of the snap parliamentary elections would be a hung parliament, leading to lots of attempts at coalition building. Emmanuel Macron has already spoken about building a grand coalition. Now, it sounds straightforward enough, but it really isn't, especially when you consider the diversity of opinions in the National Assembly, and there's plenty of extremists on the right and indeed on the left. So that's a recipe for chaos, effectively. Another, an alternative would be a far-right majority. With the National Rally getting an absolute majority in the National Assembly, which is 289 seats out of 577. That would be astonishing and would certainly send shockwaves, not just across France, but around the world. And as I said, it might translate into a 28-year-old Prime Minister who has no experience in government whatsoever. But do not rule out also an absolute majority in the new Popular Front. It's the first time that the leftists have united in a very long time. There's a coalition of Greens, Socialists, Communists, and indeed France Unbowed and small other leftist parties. And if you add to that people who want anybody but the far right, then anything could happen. Having said that, you know, the presidential, the government system in France is an overwhelmingly presidential system. So it doesn't matter really what the National Assembly looks like, because in the end, the president can rule by presidential decree and bypass the National Assembly.
Jacques, just give us your take on what you think might happen.
Three scenarios you can think of. The first one, outright majority for the National Front and these Republican allies led by Ciotti. Very unlikely. At the moment, polls are saying that maybe they could get between 230, 275, but I think it's an overestimation. The other thing, I think the most like, there's another scenario, obviously, which I'll put in second. The least is not a likely scenario either, is that the presidential party makes a very good showing and is in a position after that to broaden its majority by appealing to the social democrats who have been elected campaigning as part of the new Popular Front. The new Popular Front is purely electoral. They won't agree on anything. They can't govern together. And some of them are closer to Macron's line than they are to Mélenchon. And appealing also on the right to the Republicans who don't want to ally with the with the National Front. So that's the dream scenario, maybe that Macron had in mind. But the most likely scenario, I think, will be a hung parliament, as Nabila said, with 3 blocks. I think the main bloc would be the National Front, given if we have the opinion polls of today. And the second bloc would probably be, even they could be third. So we don't know. So it will be that. It means a mess for the next year. Macron said he wanted to bring clarity and stability. That will certainly not be the case. So we'll have, but at the same time, it's very difficult to say what it's going to be like. Let's not forget it's a 2-round election. And we'll have a clearer picture of the situation on Sunday night after the first round, because you have 577 constituencies, all with very different political landscapes. And in order to qualify for the second round, you need 12.5% of the registered voters, which means about 20% of the registered voters. So what would be interesting is on the evening of the 7th, what will happen in the constituencies where 3 candidates are qualified for the second round.
Let's bring in Joseph. Joseph, just tell me, Jordan Bardella, he seems to have a very strong TikTok game, 0 experience of government. He's 28 years old, and he could feasibly be France's next prime minister.
Yeah, and this is a trend that we see across politics in the democratic world that worries many observers, is the success of those who can mount a case that they are an outsider from the system. And to be honest with you, I mean, this is one of the advantages that Bardella has, is that he is the real deal, right? He's not a leftist that is, from a comfortable sort of background. He's not Marine Le Pen, who essentially inherited the party from her father through this kind of nepotistic type arrangement. I mean, this is a guy that grew up in a tower block in a poor suburb of Paris, right? Yeah, his detractors say that he went to, a nice private Catholic school and stuff like that. But he is the closest in French politics to somebody that has grown up kind of on the ground. He's young, he's savvy on social media, and he tapped into that Trumpist, Farage, Brexit, Maloneyist kind of strand in democratic politics that we see becoming increasingly important in the past decade or so, right? I mean, it seems to be in retrenchment in some places where, we've seen the catastrophe of Brexit in the UK, and we've seen the, chaos really of the Trump administration and the aftermath in the US. And this is the thing I think with France is that they haven't tried and tested something new like this. Macron, in fact, mounted his campaign as somebody outside of the established party structure. The damage that he did to the French political landscape, I think, has often been undersold precisely because he's a centrist, right? Because he's not necessarily someone from the extremes. Many observers, I think, missed how important his 2 victories have been, really in upsetting the French political landscape and to a certain extent feeding into this notion that, politics is best done by somebody who's slightly from the outside. And I think this is as much, the blame is as much on France's established political structures, who seem, like many in the rest of the democratic world, seem to be creaking and slow and recycling many old candidates and really struggling to come up with fresh faces and fresh ideas in the face of, popular discontent at the way things like economic inequality, house prices and migration are panning out in the democratic world. And I think this is where, outside parties like the National Front that have not been tainted by actually having to govern have an advantage. And I think also, again, Macron was also quite savvy in terms of being an early adopter of sort of grassroots social media type campaign strategies. And I think this is the way forward for politics, whether we like it or not. The issues that we see with sort of social media and the lack of journalistic ethics and stuff like that, this is the way that politics is going, right?
Thanks,
and
Joseph.
This is a lesson that established parties have to learn.
Nabila, a couple of points. Just tell me how minority communities in France will be feeling at the prospect of a far-right government, and then give me your impression of Bardella, please.
Yes, I think the prospect of a far-right prime minister would be an absolute disaster, not least of all because it will send a very clear signal that a party steeped in fascism, let's not forget that some of the founding members of the National Front, now the National Rally, have actually been members of the Waffen-SS and swore an oath to Adolf Hitler. It's also linked to a very unpleasant colonial legacy, not least of all in former colonial empire in Africa, and especially in Algeria. There's a lot of nostalgia about the loss of Algeria within the National Rally sympathizers and indeed the rank and file. But it would send a signal that there are millions of French people who are happy to vote for this party, not just in terms of letting off steam, but in terms of calling for actions. And this would translate into very reactionary actions. We're already hearing from Jordan Bardella that he will implement policies, if we can call them that, such as revoking le droit du sol, which means that people like me who were born in France to foreign parents would not automatically become French citizens. Now,
so how does that make you feel?
Well, that's something that not even the Vichy government managed to achieve when they were collaborating with the Nazis. The whole social policy of the National Rally is based on exclusion. It's based on rejection of the other, either actual immigrants or perceived ones. They're also planning to ban, for example, Muslim women wearing headscarves in the public sphere, but the kippah would be allowed for those practicing the Jewish faith. There's also talks about denying dual nationals, for example, people who hold a dual nationality from having access to public service jobs. So that's, frankly, a very daunting prospect. And having them in charge, effectively, of the government would be frightening and certainly a taste for what's coming in potentially 2027.
Does it upset you?
Of course, it upsets millions of people. It threatens the very citizenship of people like me, meaning that we could be expelled at any opportunity for no particular reason, including crimes, which is often blamed on ethnic minority groups, for example. But I think it's also... I'm also very cautious about this scenario actually happening, because there's the myth that the Prime Minister forms a government in France, when actually it's the President, who is by far the most powerful person in the Fifth Republic, who forms a government, not least of all because he chooses his Prime Minister. And we've seen Macron hiring and firing Prime Ministers before, not least of all because they didn't agree with him on policies. And I think, it's... and there's also the possibility of the judiciary clamping down on extremist policies, such as, for example, the immigration bill, which was passed last year with Macron in cooperation with the National Rally in the National Assembly. But we've seen the judiciary clamping down on this and effectively striking out the most reactionary measures.
I'm not sure Jacques agrees. Jacques, final question to you. Just give us your thoughts on what Nabila just said.
Yeah, I don't agree with the fact the president can't do anything. He can do anything if he has a majority in parliament. Otherwise, it's actually the constitution states that it's the government which conducts, it's the prime minister which conducts the policy of the government, of the nation.
But Jack, the president literally has the power to choose his government and choose his prime minister.
He chooses
so he's
the
all
prime
powerful.
Minister.
He's all powerful.
No. That's okay. The best guarantee. We've seen cohabitation and we see the limited powers. It's very clear now. We've had 4 cohabitations and we know how the powers. I would not say that government. He can choose the prime minister. Yes, he chooses, but he has to choose it within the group of the best represented group in parliament. When Chirac lost, he chose Jospin because the socialist had won, not because he liked Jospin. He would have preferred the right wing. So no, but the biggest guarantee, the biggest defender, the obstacle to the National Front carrying out their crazy reforms, which would upset loads of people, especially the binationals. And I wonder now if being part of the French team is considered as a high quality or high responsibility public jobs, because they will not be entitled to be selected, so which would be quite something. So now there is in France a constitution with a preamble of the constitution which embodies all the basic rights which a government can go across. It goes from human rights declaration to the preamble of the constitution. There's plenty. And there's no way the government could change the droit du sol by itself. The only way it could be done is through a constitutional change. And for that, constitutional, yes, it's the president who has to call for the referendum on constitutional change.
Jacques, the clock is beating us. Thank you, Jacques, Joseph and Nabila as well here in the studio with me. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team on Roundtable, thank you for watching.